I met Darya Teesewell at a Strong Word storytelling event about a month ago in Palm Springs. We chatted after the event, and I said, "Hey, Darya, you got to be on my podcast." So she came over, and we recorded this. Now, Darya is a male to female trans person, and she has a lot of stories that are really interesting. And besides that, if you don't know a trans person, this might enlighten you a little bit.
Greetings, Wilkinson here. I'm back, and today I'm with Darya Teesewell. Say hi.
Hi.
So who are you? Tell us who you are.
Oh, I am a trans woman. I've had a long and interesting life. I started out in Los Angeles, as the child of two Midwesterners. My father ran a television studio. I went to high school in West LA and the West Side. And the problem is that it wasn't really a problem. It was just that I just noticed from a very young age the idea of being able to dress in women's clothes really appealed to me, right? And this is like in the 50s. My parents were having a party in our backyard, typical LA 4th of July, which was fogged in. We could see the fireworks in Santa Monica kind of scudding in the distance. Like one of my parents' friends who lived across the alley from us was talking about the movie Some Like It Hot. And he said, well, the part where they dress up like women is supposed to be really funny. And my little ears just perked right up. Yeah. And so that was the first time I knew that something inside of me that was interested in that, even though I was growing up in America of the 1950s, where my parents were considered to be extremely open-minded and liberal because they thought homosexuals were actually human beings. So, they were, because they were in the movie industry.
Right.
Right.
Well, that's interesting because they didn't have any gay people in movies back then, did they?
Oh, yeah. There were a few. No, it was very funny because my parents were also, people often thought we were Jewish because, we worked in the movie industry and my father had dark hair and fairly darkish skin. And they actually didn't let him into the LA Country Club, not because he was Jewish, but because we worked too closely with Jews. Not hilarious, it's tragic, but yeah.
So you're 8 years old, and had you tried anything on at that point?
No, I was just barely starting to fantasize about it. I didn't have a very sophisticated view of the whole thing. It really started to come on to me when I was, in my teens, onset of puberty and all of that. And puberty was kind of miserable for me. I didn't really fit in any place. I'm told I was a kind of nice looking young man at that point, but I don't know. I think it was a combination of having a very sort of critical father who thought I should be a certain way. I mean, for example, I went in high school. I'm sorry. I'm laughing because it's hilarious. I went out in high school. I went out for football.
Really?
Oh yeah, wasn't my idea. And
that was Dad's idea.
It was Dad's idea, and it was hilarious because my father never played football when he was in high school.
Did you have the build for football or not?
I was told that I was tall and whatever. I was like a big kid. I'm still a big person.
Right.
Yeah, it went badly. And then the season kind of came and went. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm done. And my father, said, well, what's going to happen now? And I said, well, they're going to do weight training. He says, well, you should do that. The minute I walked into weight training with the varsity guys, they smelled something on me. They smelled something queer on me. I was bullied a lot. Kind of turned me off permanently to sports, which to my regret. But yeah, when I was in college, I was having feelings, but it was in college that I discovered that you could make friends with people if you drank alcohol and smoked marijuana. So that's what I did. And I also found out that it sort of helped postpone my feelings about things.
Did it postpone it or numb it?
Numb it is really the word. That's a better word for it. I had a real problem with girls too, because I was not, anytime I would get close, it would to something happening, I'd get really nervous. My body would become non-operational, if you know what I mean, which, part of this pressure I realize that's also pressure. It would be pressure on a young boy, but a young boy whose brain is saying, is this really what you want?
Now, were you attracted to guys at the time or not anyone really?
I was attracted to both men and women. I don't think I consciously realized how much I was attracted to men at that point. I was hit on a couple times by guys, and I sort of ran the other direction because I didn't want to think about it, just because of the social ramifications, and I wasn't sure about it. I just wanted to fit in. A friend of mine told me later, she says, "Well, that's very female of you. It's you actually want to fit into the right social structure and like all of that. I met my wife after a couple of horrific relationships. With one relationship with a woman who was, it was funny. I was drinking a lot and taking a lot of drugs, and I kind of didn't have girlfriends. I had hostages. I'd gone through a couple of those that crashed and burned, and then I finally met my wife. Oddly enough, we were both doing courses from the EST training. I don't know if anyone remembers that now. That's now Landmark. We'd actually met a couple times before. And I hadn't really realized it. And then we just kind of hit it off. And the strangest thing was she was recovering at the time from having her tubes tied. And, we weren't kids at this point. I'm younger than she is, but by about 5 or 6 years. She'd had to have a procedure done. And she said, as long as you're in there, you might as well tie him up. Nothing's going to happen. And the surgeon said, are you sure? And she said she was. And then, a few years after that, we got married. Her surgeon said, there happens to be one surgeon on her obstetrician says, who's also a surgeon, said, there happens to be one surgeon on the West Coast who can reverse that operation. And it happens to be me. So we actually, even though, and then my insurance wouldn't pay for it because, she'd already had the other procedure, but we didn't care. So we put it on a big medical credit card. And a little while after that, she got pregnant and we had a daughter and then a son in short order. And all this time I'm working in the movie industry. When I got out of college, I ended up working in a film lab to begin with, and then ended up working on movie sets mostly as a camera assistant. And it kind of fit my personality because it was sort of chaos with focused intensity and then more chaos and then periods of when you did nothing and a lot of time to sit around and talk and hear stories. And there was just a lot of time. It's like a 12-hour day was like average back then. And I don't know, fast forward years and years in the business, had a big house in Agoura Hills. And, I will say this, over all my relationships, including one with my wife, I would occasionally dress in female clothing in secret. And that was just sort of like a release valve for me. And it also made me think that it was just sort of a kink or a perversion. And then I turned 45 and for some reason got really important to me all of a sudden, and then I started going to a psychologist who also happened to be my wife's psychologist, interestingly enough. She said, well, we're not going to keep any secrets. And I said, well, okay, here's the first thing I'm going to tell you. She was the first psychologist that actually got it, that I was like, what I thought then was a crossdresser. And in short order, I told my wife about it. Her reaction was a combination of compassion and horror and anger and worry about like, okay, so what's going to happen to us? And are you going to change your gender? And what about our kids and all that? And so the compromise we came up with was for me to keep clothing at a facility. There was a facility back then called Lydia's that had lockers where you could actually keep your stuff in the locker and you could go there and dress up. And you could go out, right? It was like, she thought that sounded like a good compromise, and so did the psychologist, and so did I.
So you kept your clothes off premises.
So my clothes were off campus. Then I did what I thought I was supposed to do, which is like go out to dinner with these other people like me. And they were all older, and they were all like engineers who were actually transitioning, and they had talking about their surgeons and their hormones. And it was kind of boring because I had didn't realize it at the time, but I had a lot of wild thing in me. I missed being with the wild girls in high school, and I think I was sort of inching my way towards it. And then I met this one person who told me to meet her one night to say hi at the Queen Mary, which was it was a drag venue in the front, and in the back they had a bar called the King's Den, and that's where everybody went. And there was working girls in there. There were drag queens in there. There were cross-dressers in there. We weren't called trans people then, but there were trans people in there. And I met this one friend of mine. She's still around. Shout out to Nikki on the East Coast. And the hilarious thing was, then she introduced me to some other friends. And then at one point, Nikki says to me, and these other friends, she says, you're spending all that money on a locker. It'd probably be cheaper if we all just rented an apartment together.
Oh.
And I think, sure, that sounds great. It was a one-bedroom in Valley Village, right up the street from the Queen Mary. And it was a place where we would go and dress and then have sex with each other or other people. And that all started becoming obvious pretty quickly on. And I sort of just fell into it hook, line, and sinker. But
So you were with guys at this point?
Well, yeah, the lines were a little blurry for me because I kind of started with, I can remember one friend of mine, one crossdresser friend of mine kissed me and I felt her whiskers and I went, I think, wow, I just kissed a guy. And technically, actually kind of no, but kind of yes. And then it got more complicated from there. And so there were four of us and or five of us and it would kind of like ebb and wane and we became kind of notorious. This is all part of a book I'm writing right now. We became known as the Couch Kittens. Our place became known as the Slut Hut.
Oh, brother.
Yeah, oh brother, indeed. And this was like the lines between drag and cross-dressing and trans was like a new concept at that point. It was like really got like a theory that this is like 1996, 7, 8. And I just remember going to my first, there was this club called Drag Strip 66 and they would have a theme night. It was a lot of fun, and I just remember one night they had, their theme was biker chicks with dicks.
Oh, brother.
In Tranny Town, by the way, which is a word we don't use anymore. And so I kind of fell right into it. I had already had a cutoff vest that looked kind of bikerish and had some patches and other things on it, and cut off some jeans to be Daisy Dukes, fishnet stockings, which I was never without, black thigh-high, high-heeled boots, put a bandana, and I had my a red wig that was braided. And the minute I walked in the door, there were two people who ran the drag strip. There was Paul V was the DJ, and then Mr. Dan, or AKA Gina Loterman, saw me come in and says, "Okay, honey, I'm taking a picture of you." And they also entered me in a contest that night to see if I won for the theme. I didn't, but I had a really good time that night. I had a Harley Davidson tank top on. I was just really having fun, and it was a crowded, sweaty place. The drinks were outrageous. It's like they served all their drinks. The alcohol was all served in an 18-ounce solo cup. A friend of mine passing out and saying, they put something in those drinks. And I'm saying,
alcohol.
Probably alcohol.
Yeah.
So that night I was drinking beer to go with the theme, though. But anyway, so we would end up doing this, and I started staying out later, and my wife was going, "Okay, I guess you're doing this," and I just kept pushing the limits on it. And I don't know what sort of wiser part of her just said, okay, this is a person I love. They're going through something. And I feel like maybe I should just let this thing run its course, do its thing. She would remind me that I was providing for them, for the family, and I had 2 children, and I should not forget that. And I didn't. It's really interesting because it was like, I could feel myself like changing identities as I would drive towards the apartment in LA, and I would slowly decompress on the way home. And I feel, sort of like completely kind of drained and sated and kind of happy.
I wonder if Superman felt that.
Maybe. I think, it's like, honey, when I take the cape off, I don't know what it is, right?
Right.
But anyway, so that was a few wild years. And in the middle of that, not until I actually did pass out at Drag Strip 66 and have to get driven home and into my locker at Lydia's. I was still at Lydia's then, and passed out and woke up with sun coming through. I mean, and my wife just, I frankly don't remember. She just kind of looked at me and went, "Oh God, okay." I come home and it's like the guys are out mowing their lawns. Anyway.
So you were out all night.
I was out all night, basically, yeah. But not, and I didn't, at that time, I didn't have sex with anybody. I ended up getting sober in the middle of all this. 1998, I just woke up one morning and looked for a meeting and found one, and kind of made sense to me and all that. Now, I didn't stop going out, and there was a tense moment, when I showed up at the apartment and I wasn't drinking alcohol. And I was lucky because one of my friends who was there had experimented with sobriety at one point and she said, "Hey, look, if she wants to be sober, just let her be sober, okay?" And that's what they did. And I became the designated driver for life, which was okay with me.
Oh.
And but here's the thing: it was like, and sometimes they'll say to people who are getting sober, "Well, you shouldn't go to slippery places." Well, I needed to go to slippery places because I was like in the middle of like looking for my identity in the middle of all this, and
Right.
and discovered that part of my identity still is being sober. So eventually we lost the apartment. Which is a sad story I won't go into because it was mostly my fault. And that sort of petered out. And then I ended up working for Lydia's. I ended up working for Lydia's that was under new ownership at that time. And I started out just doing web stuff for them. Like I was the web mistress for them. Because I was having a hard time finding regular work. I think a lot of it was, I didn't really realize how much I was in the middle of a gigantic identity crisis. It was because it was all secret. It was all being hidden from everyone else in my life except for my wife and me.
Did the kids not know?
The kids, I think the kids just learn to roll with it. As kids in terms of kids who grew up in Agora Hills, my kids are relatively sane. They're they have a certain groundedness to them, and I think it had to do with the fact that their mother and I just sort of loved them through everything. They did make mistakes, and we just sort of were there for them when they made their mistakes, and then they bounced back from it. And, they're both very successful right now. They're both very creative. They're both creative people. My son's a painter, and my daughter has a personal chef business, and they're both doing great. That's one of those things I still haven't gone into much detail asking them about. I mean, at one point it was hilarious when I finally did come out to them, which was much later, by the way. We kept sort of hiding this for a long time. I remember finally sending them an email explaining who I was, and it's like the second I sent it, my son was living in the house at the time. He comes in the room, he goes, "Dude, we know, okay?"
Oh, really?
Yeah. My daughter called me a few minutes later. She goes, "Yeah, it's not, don't, yeah."
Got it.
Yeah, got it. And they're both fine with it. They're both good with it. They just accept it as being a part of who I am, sort of the same way my wife does. And it's funny, I sometimes think I'm more behind the curve in accepting than they are of accepting me. Mm-hmm. And I think, that's just sort of collateral damage from growing up in the 50s. And so, and also it was interesting, when I got sober, I had to find a higher power. And so, because I had kind of walked away from religion about age 15, I stopped going to church with my father because I couldn't figure out, who is this Jesus guy again? How does he fit into this whole picture? And God, I understood. And I sort of felt that way back then when I was 15. I felt like I had a connection with God because I was very, very alone and I was somebody to talk to. Later they told me I needed to, find a way to get relieved of my addiction. And I went, oh, okay, well, I'll try this. What I was afraid of was I was afraid that God was going to tell me that, I had to stop being who I was. I had to stop. I still sort of viewed my behavior at that point as like something aberrant. And it's funny, when I kind of surrendered to the whole thing, I realized God was just fine with me the way I was, whatever you conceive God to be. My conception of my higher power, I'm a little more, I'm not Buddhist, but I'm kind of Buddhish. I sort of get that concept of the universe being the way it is. It's also, incredibly realistic. It's like they tell you you're going to die in advance and you should probably make the best of it. Anyway, so I ended up working 2 stores that sold products to crossdressers. The first store I worked for had, when I first got there, they said, "Oh, we're both sober too." Oh, great. I think, God, this is going to be awesome. And then the first time I saw one of them with a beer, I said, "Oh, maybe not the kind of sober I am."
Right.
And by the time I left, one was doing heroin and one was doing crack. I figured it was probably time to get out of there because I saw them starting to do things that I thought like the district attorney might be interested in. And I said, "They don't have my real name, do they?" So, and my legal name. And it was all being, there was a lot of cash being paid and, the whole combination of things going on. And I ended up working for another place that used to be right next to the Queen Mary. And that was a very interesting period of time in my life because I ended up doing, tons of makeovers on people who would come into my store. And I tried to expand the business to include people in the BDSM and the kink community too, because there's a certain crossover there that crossdressers used to be kind of snobby about just being crossdressers, which I find bizarre, but that was the way it was. But I kind of liked bringing a mix of people in. And
right.
It was an interesting experience there. I mean, I think I sold, I sold a broad of Arlegine Merman once. That was fun.
You sold a what?
A brassiere that held breast forms to Varlagine Merman. She was a famous drag queen back in the day. If Lady Bunny were here, she could tell you how she went.
Okay.
But, just astonishing who would come in, who would walk in the door and what would happen. And I'd get to watch this sort of crisp businessman sort of melt into this demure little sort of librarian, or I'd watch, a house painter turn into a sex kitten, it was really interesting. And all just a little bit of paint and powder and a change of clothes. It was an interesting time, and we had a service where I would also take them out to a club if they paid us extra. And that's where I learned that it wasn't a good idea. I was not drinking. I learned it was not a good idea for them to drink vodka and Red Bulls on an empty stomach, because usually they'd spend all this time to get to go to the club, and then they'd have 2 of those, and all of a sudden it'd be like, "Oh, I'm getting dizzy." It's like, yeah, okay, the night's probably over then. So, but then just shooting far ahead, I eventually stopped. I needed to get back in my health insurance plan from the movie industry. I ended up leaving the shop to go work on a TV series in San Diego. And that was interesting because I didn't realize what a reentry I was going to have, because now my hair is long and dyed. I've had a lot of laser treatments to remove my beard, and I was going to live with my parents. They didn't notice anything for some reason, except my father just said,
Wait, you were married though?
I'm still married. Yeah, my wife and I have never divorced, and I actually basically.
But you were going to not live with her and you were going to live with your parents?
Oh no, I should explain that.
Yeah.
The reason I went to live with my parents was because the job was in San Diego. The way he sold it to me, the guy who asked me to come work on the show says, if you operate the B camera, you can come down here and make $40,000 in 3 months or 4 months. I go, that sounds good. Get back on the health plan and the pension plan and get things booted up again. And so that's what I did. And it was a very interesting time. I have a very interesting relationship with the whole San Diego area for some strange reason. Oceanside and North County and San Diego proper. I've been there a lot. There's a famous trans bar there called the SRO. I've been to multiple times, but it was just interesting because I'm like, so now I'm back to presenting one identity and having another identity in private. And what's interesting is that every time I've done this, the identities have started to blend more.
So when you went back to the camera work, it was as a man?
Theoretically, everyone was saying, how come your nails are long? Makeup guy comes up to me and looks at my face and he goes, okay, you do have a beard. It's just all really white and fine. Interesting. And if anybody was going to get it, it was going to be a gay man. And that was like the last time I actually worked maybe not the very last time, but pretty much the last time I worked a real camera type job. And after that, I went off and did safety training at a big bureaucracy, which was great on one hand because it was a 40-hour week, but I still got my pension and health care. And it was hilarious too, because then they used to send me down to San Diego to do safety training. Hilarious because I'd always pack
some extra clothes.
Darya was always in my bag, and people where I worked too also had like how come all the old pictures of you have brown hair, and now you have blonde hair. I go.
Was your hair long then?
Yeah, my hair was about the same length.
It's shoulder length.
It looks a lot better now because it's been nicely streaked by my fabulous hairdresser here in Palm Springs.
So you went from the two trans stores, you were wearing female clothing, correct?
Yeah, I did it the exact opposite of the way that they told you to transition in those days. In the old days, the idea was you're supposed to basically go to work. If you still have to go to work as a man, that's fine. Then just live the rest of your life as a female. I did exactly the opposite. I would go to work as a female, and then I'd come home and basically take the stuff off. I have to tell you now that it's like as gender becomes blurrier and blurrier. If you ask me what gender I am at home, it's like I don't know, whatever one I have at the moment. I think my gender, I wrote this actually on my Facebook this morning. I says my gender today is flirty. So
what do you think about the political climate, especially with the Republicans and like all the anti-trans stuff? Where do you think that's going?
It breaks my heart. It's just so despicable. I worry about the kids. I will say this. One of the reasons I decided to move to Coachella Valley is because, I live in Cathedral City, which is, right next to Palm Springs, and two of the gay-friendliest, queer-friendliest cities in the country. It wasn't lost on me when I moved here that this is a safer space to be. I can't imagine what it's like right now to be trans or even gay in Florida. The sort of weaponized hatred that that just gets like completely cooked up by social media, and social media is making a profit on it. I just saw, I think the news yesterday was that Meta was going to let, Donald Trump back on Facebook. And I said, yeah, because it's going to make them a lot of money because everybody's going to be yelling at each other. And when they yell at each other, they get to sell you a bunch of stuff you don't need. That's like the whole thing. It's like no one will ever really know if like Glenn Beck or Alex Jones really believe the crap they say, or they just do that so they can sell you like energy drinks and boner pills. That's their MO.
Right.
I guess sometimes I'm just absolutely lividly angry about it. I think I save most of if I was really going to focus my ire on anyone, it would be on the trans people I know who are still loyal to that cult. I mean, people like Caitlyn Jenner, who's just a complete disappointment. Another person I know lives in San Diego, and she's she's all in on it. And but the whole toxic mix of it. The anti-trans hatred. They're banning books now. It was funny because this other person I know in San Diego was saying, well, the Twitter files have proved that Biden was censoring conservatives. And I said, Ron DeSantis is banning books about people like us in Florida. Do you care about that? Or do you care more about the fact that you still can have your automatic weapon, Excuse me, semi-automatic weapon. Actually, it's funny. When I was in safety classes, I was teaching gun safety for the movie industry. So I actually have a pretty decent vocabulary on guns and weaponry. Those are all complicated, right? Yeah, it makes me extremely angry. I think we all do whatever we can do. I have friends here in this valley who are fighting, who are activists. And still in this, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that I have years and years and years of male privilege going for me, which is probably why I own a house and I have the safety I have and all the rest of it. If you're a trans woman of color and you're 18 years old, your options are few, especially if you live in a red state. Not so great in a blue state either, but it's even worse someplace like that.
Looking back at your life, if you could push the rewind button, would you do everything the same or would it be different?
Putting my Buddhist hat on, I'd just say, well, let's just look at what is. Let's look at what the karma has been.
Right.
And I have to say that, let's just do the what if for a second. So what if I figured this out when I was 17? Mm-hmm. Would I have ever married my wife and had children, the same children? Probably not. Is it possible I would have married and adopted some children with someone else, male or female? Possible. I don't, I guess I regret not starting all of this sooner. But by not starting it sooner, I avoided an awful lot of pain. And I have some guilt about that, frankly. I have some guilt that I haven't completely thrown my hat in the ring for some kind of complex legal reasons. I've inherited some money and other stuff. And I've always sort of in the back of my mind thought, well, what'll happen if I have a name change and stuff like that, stuff that I rationalized to myself. But, ultimately, I'm just happy that I get to be who I am. I learn a little bit more about what that is every day. I'm really happy right now. I like where I live. I love my wife. I love my children. And I love looking out, in my backyard at my pool. And I've got 2 mountains in the view and the desert over my back fence. I'm very happy.
And you can be who you want to be.
And I can be who I want to be.
Or who you are,
I have to say another thing that's great about this area is that, like, when I walk into Vons or Stater Brothers, they see me all kinds of different ways, and everybody just goes, "Oh, hi." Yeah, I walked into Italian deli today, and the minute I walked in the door, they gave me a big smile, and I found good medical care here with the help of some really dedicated people. Medical care for trans people, that's the other political thing that concerns me a lot, is that people in those states aren't going to be able to get the proper medical care, and it's like you can't, and by the way, you can't slow this down. If you tell a 16-year-old that they're too young to transition, they're going to find a way, just because people are going to be who they want to be.
Any advice for my listeners?
For your listeners.
How about somebody that's not trans? What's the advice for them?
Just remember we're all human. I used to belong to a really great message board group based on my friend Helen Boyd wrote a book about her spouse called My Husband Betty, and then finally, and she also wrote a sequel called She's Not the Man I Married. But we all had this chat group together, and one of the people on there just said, if you've met one trans person, you've met one trans person. And that's really still true. I think it's still true.
Wow.
I think I've just noticed it since I've been here too. I now I can't look at, for example, let's just take one subgroup, gay males. I can't look at them as a monolith. There's, all kinds of people living all kinds of experience. I've seen couples where one of them is in a wheelchair, and I've seen couples where, everybody's, we're all a little bit different. We're all a little bit human, and, if somebody with long hair and a 5 o'clock shadow tells you that they want to use she, her pronouns, tell them, yeah, use she, her pronouns with them. You don't have to, it's not your job to tell them they don't look good,
Right.
We might have a talk with them, but it's like, that's what sisters and brothers do for each other.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you for popping in today.
My pleasure, Wilkinson.
Darya, it's great having you. Thank you.
Great to be here. Thanks.